Hi, Glenn here, Monster Guitars. In this video I do some drilling and some routing and some shaping and some binding, and I begin some scraping. Most of the design decisions about this guitar were planned. Most of them. Once you have routed your neck pocket and put your neck in, bolted your neck into the body, this is a bolt-on neck, from that point on, forget what you thought was the center line of the body. You know, don't just stick to that center line you previously had and say to yourself, well, I'm going to center my pickup cavities on that line. No, don't do that. Now that your neck is in, all that matters is that your bridge is lined up with your neck and your pickup cavities are lined up with your strings, which means, of course, that they will be lined up with your neck. Once the neck is on, that is the new rule, right? That now tells you where everything else has to go. So I'm using these really handy acrylic templates for routing out my pickup cavities. It is acrylic, it's just got the brown protective layer still on it because I left it on. Something that I see asked occasionally on forums is how you're going to route out those tight corners, because even though you've got a template, most bits, now this is an especially large bit, so this is a silly example to use, but even slightly smaller ones that people use to route out pickup cavities, the bearing is so large that it's not going to fit in that tight corner. So how do you route out those tight corners? And there are a couple of options. I wouldn't use the first method with an acrylic template because it might get hot and melt. One is to simply use a straight bit with no bearing and have the shank of the bit right against the template, but you have to move quickly because it will start to get hot if you've got an MDF template even and burn into it. That's risky, but a better way to go is using this. Now this is a 1/4 inch bit which has a 1/4 inch sized bearing on it, which is very small, and it's small enough to maneuver around the corners of that template. I've only ever seen 2 of these, the ones that I have, which are made by aaaand, but also if you're in the UK, Radian bits are very good, expensive but very good, and they make a similar one, also 1/4 inch. So they do exist, and those are really the ideal way to go if you're routing these by hand with a template and not using a CNC machine. I should wear a mask. Well, I mean, it's not very fine, but all the same, a mask is best practice, so I should be doing that. And there, you can see the tight radiuses have been nicely cut with that bit with the small bearing. I'm using the bridge plate as a template to get the holes going in at exactly the right place, and that works perfectly fine on the top of the guitar, but by the time the drill bit has worked its way through to the back, it has wandered slightly, and I wish I had a way of making sure that doesn't happen. I can think of a way, and that would be to have a template like this that was very thick, say 3 times the thickness of this plate, so that as the bit goes through this template, it's kind of held in place more. That might help, but it's a little bit frustrating. Now, ultimately, it's not going to be a problem because I have a way of compensating for this, and I'll show you, I guess I'll show you that next. So I use this template, or is it a jig? This one's a grey area, to place the string ferrules on the back of the body now. I always do, so that even though the holes that were drilled through from the other side are not perfect in their spacing, these are, and when you put a string in the ferrule in one of these holes, it will go into the original hole. So it's great that those things exist, although, as I said, I would still like a method of getting the initial holes perfect, because, you know, you like to do things right. So when I started this guitar, I knew a few things about it. In fact, you may recall right back when I was showing you the top, I knew that the top would go on it, this top, and I knew that it would probably be basically a strat-shaped guitar, which it is. I knew which pickups would go in it because they're pickups that I had on hand, and I knew which bridge would go on it, and a few other things. But I've made some design decisions along the way, like putting that layer of elm on the headstock, and this decision, which I've just now come to. So traditionally, a Stratocaster type guitar has what's called an arm contour or a forearm contour or an arm bevel or something like that. And it's where there's a fall away over the edge of the guitar up here where the player rests his or her arm for comfort. And it looks kind of classy too. However, I could do that, but where that is done with a fairly traditional look, with a top on the guitar, you'll make what's called a drop top. So the body itself will have the contour built into it, and then you'll make the top, and then using one of a number of possible methods, you'll bend the top over that existing contour so that you'll have the body and the top with the contour on it, and the top will cover that contour. But as you can see, I've just got a flat top on the body and consequently a flat top, separate piece. If I were to cut the arm contour into this, I would be cutting straight through the top and exposing the body behind. Now, that's a thing, and I think it looks really good actually. It's what I did on the Viper, and I thought that looked very nice. And a number of makers do this. I see a lot of guitars that come out of the Kiesel factory that have that bevel there, where the bevel has cut straight through the top, so the top doesn't cover the whole top of the guitar. It looks great, but it's a very specific modern look, and that's just not the look that I'm going for with this guitar. I want it to look kind of vintage-ish, or at least old school. I know it's not very vintage to have the exposed wood on the top of the Strat like I am, but yeah, that's not what I want to do. So I've decided to bind the top instead. Yeah, that's a very traditional look, binding. It's a slightly uneven patch here where I let the router get a bit wonky, so what I'll do is I'll just lower it ever so slightly and route that part out even more. Okay, and I think we're good. Right. There we are. A nice even and clean channel all the way around. Now, if you're looking closely, you'll think, hang on a minute. That is, focus. That channel is much taller than the binding, and it is. In fact, it's a little bit more so than I realized, but that's okay. I'm going to be creating a fall away at the edge of the body, so it'll start to taper off, maybe there, somewhere. It'll start to fall away, taper off, and meet the top of the binding. So I guess that's somewhat modern. So something I'm thinking about doing, in fact I've kind of decided in my head that I will do it, is use this, which is called a cove bit. Not all cove bits have a bearing guide, but this one does. And I'll put it on my router table and then sit the guitar face down on the table and route around the edge. So I can't really demonstrate just now, but the bearing will ride there and the curved bit will cut part of that off and assist in the fall away down to that line, which is where the binding will begin. This is kind of experimental for me. I've not done this before on a guitar anyway. So look, I'm kind of following my nose, but it seems like it should actually produce a rather nice effect. Let's find out. in general, going deeper was the right thing to do, but I accidentally did some damage and routed part of that edge, which I didn't want to. I know how I'm going to fix that. I'm going to route out a section of the elm and glue in a piece of elm, and hopefully that will be invisible. But I'll have to do that before I do the binding, which is annoying. Okay. Here's just a micro update to say that I have repaired that piece of damage in the way that I said I would. So I used a straight edge and routed out a piece of the elm top, and using an offcut of the same elm top, I glued in a piece of elm. Although it's the same piece, it does look at the moment anyway to be a slightly different color. I'm not sure why that would be. But I think once the final sand and finish are done, it should look pretty good. Binding is a messy business. Maybe I'm just not very good at it. It tends to turn out okay. It's just messy getting there with the acetone, creating melted bits of plastic that have to be scraped up. Sometimes things will come slightly unstuck, so I'll put a clamp on there just to hold things until they have dried and stuck on properly. I will get there. That looks just ridiculously silly, but once it's all scraped up, I think it'll look nice. Let's see. The answer to the problem of getting the surface of the wood to meet with the surface of the binding is going to come in the form of scraping and sanding. This is what's called a gooseneck scraper. I guess that's the goose's body and that's the neck with no head. And it's good for curves like this. I haven't used it all that many times, but it doesn't seem very sharp, or maybe my technique just needs some work. But this is what I'll be using for the most part on this job. Where the material is thicker, before going to the scraper, which takes off a very small amount at a time, I'm going to use this gouge. The camera is slightly in the way there, but the shadows are not really working for me. Sorry about that. I'm going to stop this just here. As fun as it is to use these hand tools, and it is, I've been using the gouge a bit off camera and it's really enjoyable. Obviously I've got a long ways to go. What I've done here is there were a couple of small pieces of damage to the white binding, and so we used an old trick where you dissolve some bits of binding in acetone to make a sort of paste, and then you fill the gaps with that paste. That should turn out fine. I've done it before. I haven't always commented on it though. I'm going to stop this here because I've got a crazy idea, potentially crazy destructive idea, on how to finish off the rest of this binding, scraping and edge shaping very quickly. And it could go horribly wrong, but we'll know once I get the thing that I'm waiting for in the mail.